In a world where power often hides pain, one rainy night brought together two souls from different worlds. A broken CEO trapped in silence and a humble mechanic who had nothing but kindness to offer. What happened that night changed both their lives forever. Stay till the end, for a story that proves compassion can rebuild even the strongest hearts. The rain fell like shattered glass from the sky, each drop slicing through the darkness of the deserted highway. A sleek, black luxury car stood stranded by the roadside, its engine silent, its headlights flickering weakly through the storm. Inside sat a black woman in her early 40s, her trembling hands gripping the edge of her phone, the screen flashing no signal over and over. She had once been the most powerful woman in her industry, a CEO whose voice commanded entire rooms, whose signature could change lives. But tonight, she was small, fragile, and terrified. The glow from the dashboard light revealed her face, pale with exhaustion, her eyes carrying the weight of battles no one had seen. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her, chaotic, cold, and endless. Her wheelchair rested folded in the back seat, untouched, a silent reminder of everything she had lost. Months ago, after the corporate betrayal that cost her both her career and her ability to walk, she had locked herself away from the world. She trusted no one now, not her board, not her friends, not even the strangers who offered help. The car's engine had died 20 minutes ago, and now even her phone had given up. The rain grew heavier, hammering against the roof as if demanding to be let in. She sat motionless, afraid to even breathe too loud in the silence of nowhere. Just when her heart began to race with the realization that she was truly alone, a faint light appeared in the distance. Headlights. They grew larger, closer, cutting through the storm like two glowing eyes. A pickup truck slowed down beside her, its tires crunching on the wet gravel. Her pulse spiked. Her mind went back to every fear she'd learned since her accident. Fear of vulnerability, of being trapped, of being hurt when she couldn't fight back. The driver's door opened and a tall figure stepped out into the rain. He wore a soaked mechanic's jacket, his boots splashing through puddles as he walked toward her car. Her breath quickened. She reached for the lock button and pressed it hard. The man's silhouette stopped a few feet away, his face shadowed by the downpour. She could barely see him through the fogged glass, but the way he moved, steady, unhurried, felt strangely calm. Still, panic gripped her. Her voice came out broken, trembling as she whispered through the closed window. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk." The words hung in the air, raw and desperate. The man froze, his eyes softening with instant understanding. Then, slowly, he lifted his hands, palms open, showing he meant no harm. His voice, deep yet gentle, carried through the rain. "Ma'am, I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "I'm here to fix what's broken, even if it's not the car." Something in the way he said it made her heartbeat slow, just a little. His tone wasn't pity, it was human. She hesitated for a long second, searching his face for any trace of deceit. There was none. Just honesty and a tired kindness that didn't demand anything in return. Finally, she unlocked the door with a hesitant click. He nodded once in gratitude and moved toward the hood of her car, lifting it with practiced ease. Steam hissed out, mingling with the cold rain. As he worked, the night remained almost silent except for the rhythmic tapping of the rain and the low hum of his voice when he muttered to himself about the engine. She watched him through the windshield. The way he focused, the way he moved with quiet confidence. He didn't ask questions about her wheelchair. He didn't look at her with sympathy. He just worked, fixing what he could as if she were any other person on any other night. For her, that small normalcy felt like a miracle. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour before he finally stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. "You should be good to go," he said through the open window. She could barely find words. The rain had eased now. The air smelled of wet asphalt and relief. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," but it felt too small for what she wanted to say. He just smiled faintly, nodded, and said, "Drive safe, ma'am. Nights like this can be rough." She wanted to ask his name, wanted to tell him that his kindness had reached deeper than he could imagine. But the words caught in her throat. As he walked back to his truck, she watched him disappear into the mist, the red taillights fading into the storm. The road ahead was empty again, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. The fear that had once kept her caged began to loosen its hold. She started the car, the engine roaring back to life, and stared through the windshield at the endless stretch of road before her. The rain had slowed to a drizzle now, the world calm once more. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "He fixed more than the car." A faint smile crossed her lips, a rare thing, fragile but real. That night, under the cold glow of a storm, a stranger's kindness had reached a heart that power and money never could. And for the first time, she drove forward not as a CEO, not as a woman in a wheelchair, but as a soul beginning to heal. The morning after the storm, she woke to sunlight slipping through her curtains, yet her mind lingered on the night before. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image of the mechanic. His calm eyes, the steady tone of his voice, the simple kindness that had disarmed her fear. His face returned to her like a soft echo. For months she had avoided people, hiding from pity and questions. But this man had looked at her differently, not as someone broken, not as a charity case, but as a person still capable of being whole. That thought haunted her in the gentlest way. By the end of the week, she found herself staring at her phone, searching for the name of the small garage painted faintly on his truck door. It wasn't far, a few miles outside the city. She didn't plan to go. Yet, a quiet voice inside whispered that maybe she should. Maybe saying thank you in person would ease the weight she had been carrying. On a cold Tuesday morning, she rolled her wheelchair into her car, fastened the adaptive controls, and drove to the repair shop. The garage was modest, oil stains on the floor, tools hanging on hooks, and the scent of gasoline mixed with coffee in the air. When she entered, he looked up from under the hood of a car, surprised. His expression shifted quickly from confusion to a warm, genuine smile. "Did the car give you trouble again?" he asked lightly. She smiled back for the first time in months, shaking her head. "No, I just came to say thank you." He wiped his hands on a rag and gestured toward a small table in the corner. "Coffee's fresh. You might as well sit for a minute." They sat across from each other, steam rising from paper cups. For a while, there was silence. Not awkward, but peaceful. Then she began to talk, almost without realizing it. Words that had been trapped in her throat for months started to spill out. She told him about the accident, how one moment she was leaving a board meeting, and the next, her car had been crushed by another driver's recklessness. How she woke up in a hospital to doctors saying she'd never walk again. How her company, her so-called family, slowly turned their backs on her when she could no longer stand in front of cameras or attend endless meetings. She told him about the silence that followed. A silence that grew heavier every day until it drowned her. The mechanic didn't interrupt. He didn't offer hollow sympathy or motivational lines. He simply listened, his eyes steady, his hands folded, his presence strong enough to hold her story without judgment. When she finally stopped, he looked down for a moment, then spoke softly. "My sister," he said, "was told the same thing, that she'd never walk again." She looked up, surprised. He nodded slowly. It was after a crash. She was 18. For a long time, she hated the world and herself. But I refused to believe that was the end. I spent months building braces for her legs. Every day we practiced, one step at a time. It took a year, maybe more, but one morning, she stood up, shaking, crying, but standing. The words hung in the air like a quiet miracle. The CEO felt something stir deep inside, a spark, faint but alive. Tears welled in her eyes, but for once they didn't come from pain. They came from something else, hope. No one had ever spoken to her this way without pretending to understand, without telling her to be strong. This man had lived it, the fight, the exhaustion, the faith. She whispered, barely audible, "You must be proud of her." He smiled. "I am, but I'm prouder of the fight it took to get there. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to lead others," he said quietly. "It's to allow someone to help you stand again. She stared at him for a long time, the words sinking into the emptiness that had lived in her for so long. They didn't fix everything, but they planted something inside her, something real. When she left that day, the air felt lighter. In the days that followed, she found herself driving back to the garage often. It wasn't planned, but her car always seemed to turn that way. Each visit was different. Sometimes they spoke for hours, sometimes just shared silence and coffee. He taught her small things that gave her independence again. How to adjust her seat for easier transfers from her wheelchair. How to check oil levels without help. How to handle tools with steady confidence. These were simple lessons, but to her they were the first steps toward reclaiming her strength. She started laughing again, small, hesitant laughs that grew into genuine smiles. Her eyes, once dull and distant, began to glow with quiet determination. At home, she practiced the things he showed her, not just physically but mentally, the patience, the self-trust. She looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized herself. The woman who once avoided her reflection was now meeting her own gaze. Each evening, when she returned home from the garage, she felt lighter, freer. Her fears still existed, but they no longer ruled her. The mechanic had become her friend, not because he fixed her car that night, but because he fixed something deeper. He reminded her that broken didn't mean useless, and that healing didn't always begin in hospitals. Sometimes it began with 2 cups of coffee, a story shared, and the gentle strength of someone who refused to see her as anything less than whole. Weeks turned into months, and with each sunrise, the woman who once lived in fear began to find her footing again. This time, not through her legs, but through her spirit. Every visit to the mechanic's garage had given her something new to hold on to: courage, calm, and quiet strength. One morning, as she sat by the window with her coffee, staring at the city skyline, a thought came over her like a sudden light. She realized she had been running away from the very place that once gave her purpose. Her company, the empire she built from nothing, still stood tall, though she no longer led it. It was time to go back, not to reclaim her power, but to rebuild what power had destroyed. The next week, the automatic glass doors of the corporate tower slid open with a soft chime. Every pair of eyes turned. The employees froze mid-conversation as the sound of her wheelchair echoed through the marble floor. She moved slowly, confidently, her chin lifted, eyes clear. Whispered voices followed her, some shocked, some awkward, some filled with guilt. They had written her off long ago, assuming she'd never show her face again. But she had come, not as the woman they remembered, but as someone transformed. She rolled straight into the boardroom where familiar faces sat around the table, men and women who had once praised her every decision but abandoned her the moment she fell. Their polite smiles barely hid their discomfort. They muttered greetings, unsure how to address her. She didn't waste time on small talk. "I didn't come here to revisit the past," she said softly, her voice steady and warm. "I came to rebuild our future, and to make sure no one else is left behind the way I was." The room fell silent. She pressed a button on her tablet, and the screen behind her lit up with a simple phrase: "Wheels of Hope." She explained her vision, a program to hire and empower people with disabilities, to train them in modern skills, to make every office, every workspace accessible. "We've built machines that can reach the stars," she said, "yet we still create buildings that some people can't enter. That ends now." Her words carried no bitterness, only truth. The board members exchanged looks. This was not the broken woman they had dismissed. This was someone renewed, speaking from compassion, not ego. One of them hesitated before saying, "That's ambitious." She smiled faintly. So was building this company once. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into the work. She visited rehabilitation centers where men and women sat quietly in wheelchairs, their eyes dull with hopelessness. She talked to them, not as a CEO, but as someone who had been where they were. She shared her story, not the public version that made headlines, but the private one that carried pain and truth. She told them that strength wasn't always about walking. Sometimes it was about moving forward in other ways. Many cried. Many smiled for the first time in years. She hired engineers to design adaptive desks, elevators that didn't just meet regulations but honored dignity, and training programs that opened doors that had always been closed. Her offices transformed. Where once the halls had been filled with people chasing profit, now they echoed with laughter, with purpose, with gratitude. She watched new employees arrive every week, some in wheelchairs, some with prosthetic limbs, all carrying a sense of pride. She often found herself smiling at their determination. In their stories, she saw reflections of herself, broken once, but never truly defeated. At night, when she sat alone in her office, she often thought of him, the mechanic who had unknowingly set all this in motion. His face came to her mind whenever she doubted herself. The memory of that stormy night reminded her that kindness had power beyond measure. She wondered if he ever thought about her, if he knew what his words had done. Somewhere she imagined him in his small garage, fixing cars and helping strangers, never realizing that one of those strangers had taken his lesson and turned it into something far greater, and she was right. In that same small garage miles away, the mechanic's days remained humble and quiet. He repaired cars with the same patience as always, offering coffee to weary travelers, never asking for more than a smile in return. Sometimes, when the night grew silent, he'd glance at the road outside, the very stretch where he had once stopped to help a frightened woman in the rain. He often wondered if she was all right now. Maybe she'd found peace, maybe not. But deep down, he hoped she had. One cold afternoon, while cleaning his workbench, he noticed an envelope slipped under the shop door. It was thick, embossed with gold edges, and bore a seal he didn't recognize. He wiped his hands, opened it carefully, and read the first line aloud. His eyes widened. It was an official invitation, handwritten and signed by her, the CEO. The letter thanked him for his kindness, spoke of a new initiative called Wheels of Hope, and invited him to attend a corporate ceremony in his honor. His hands trembled slightly as he read the last line. "You once told me you fix what's broken. Now let me show you what that meant." He stood there for a long moment, the letter pressed to his chest, the hum of the garage filling the silence. He smiled to himself, shaking his head softly. That night in the rain had been nothing to him but the right thing to do. Yet somehow that small act had traveled farther than he ever imagined, reaching hearts, changing lives, and returning to him like a quiet echo of gratitude carried on the wind. The grand hall was alive with anticipation, buzzing with chatter, camera flashes, and the subtle hum of excitement that only came when something extraordinary was about to unfold. Reporters adjusted their lenses, microphones jostled for the perfect angle, and employees whispered among themselves, curious about what their once absent CEO had to reveal. The air was thick with expectation, yet beneath it all lay a quiet sense of reverence. The woman who had disappeared from their lives, who had been written off by the world as defeated and broken, was about to return, not merely to command, but to transform. The spotlight fell as the doors opened and she rolled into view, her wheelchair gliding effortlessly across the polished floor. Every eye in the room turned. Some faces showed disbelief, some awe, and some a hint of shame for ever doubting her. She paused at the podium, her hand steady on the controls of her chair, and surveyed the crowd. In that moment, she carried not just her presence, but the weight of a journey that had been quiet, painful, and profoundly private. She began to speak, her voice calm yet commanding, resonant with authority that came not from fear or intimidation, but from experience and truth. She told them about the nights she had spent alone, the accident that had taken her mobility, and the betrayal that had made her question herself and the world around her. She spoke of the stormy night on the highway, the fear that had paralyzed her as much as her legs, and then the man who had appeared, unassuming, quiet, yet carrying a kindness so profound it had pierced through her despair. The audience listened in silence as she recounted the story of the mechanic. The stranger who had approached without judgment, who had fixed her car, yes, but more importantly, had reminded her that some of the strongest forms of power were invisible: humanity, compassion, and empathy. She shared how that night had lit a spark within her, a spark that grew into a fire of purpose, driving her to build a program that would give hope and dignity to those who had been sidelined by circumstance. She spoke of Wheels of Hope, the initiative designed to empower people with disabilities, to provide employment, independence, and a sense of belonging where none had existed before. Then she paused, allowing the story to settle in the room, and her gaze shifted toward the back. "I invited someone very special here tonight," she said, her voice softening with emotion. "A man who didn't just fix my car, but fixed me." The murmurs grew as the crowd turned, craning their necks, and he appeared, hesitant, almost frozen, a humble figure in the midst of grandeur. The mechanic, soaked from rain that had long since passed, now stood overwhelmed by the applause and the realization that his simple act of kindness had rippled farther than he could ever imagine. She wheeled toward him, her expression warm and sincere, and addressed him directly. "That night," she said, "you didn't just help a stranger, you changed a life. You showed me that strength doesn't come from power, it comes from compassion." Her words were met with silence, a reverent pause that felt as though time itself had slowed. Then slowly the room erupted into applause, standing ovation filling every corner, every camera capturing the scene. The mechanic's eyes glistened with tears he hadn't expected, hands shaking as she reached out to hand him a small plaque. Engraved upon it were the words, "You fixed more than a car that night." He accepted it with quiet humility, the weight of the moment settling in his chest. Around them, cameras flashed, capturing not just the recognition, but the union of two lives bound by a night of rain, fear, and the quiet power of kindness. The music swelled in the background, orchestral and triumphant, carrying the emotion of a journey that had begun in fear and ended in transformation. Their handshake, firm yet gentle, symbolized more than gratitude. It was a meeting of souls, a silent acknowledgement that some connections transcend circumstance, status, and expectation. As the applause continued, the CEO took a deep breath and looked over the crowd, her eyes bright with conviction and calm authority. The journey that had begun with pain had come full circle, and in doing so had sparked a movement that would extend far beyond the walls of that hall. It wasn't about accolades or headlines. It was about recognizing that healing, true healing, often begins with a single act of unassuming kindness. And in the quiet of the room, amidst the lingering energy of the event, the narrator reflects, in a world obsessed with wealth, success, and power, one small act of genuine compassion had rebuilt not just an empire, but a heart. It reminded everyone present and everyone who would hear this story that sometimes fixing what is broken does not require grand gestures or authority. Sometimes it simply requires seeing what still works, the humanity within us all. Kindness can heal what money and power never can, and a single genuine soul, willing to act without expectation, has the capacity to change lives in ways no one could foresee. For even in moments of fear and despair, hope can be sparked by someone willing to step forward, offer help, and believe in the strength of another.